Well, hello. My name is Rich Mironov, and I'm really excited to be doing one of the keynotes here for Elevate. And what we'll be talking about in the next half hour, plus some Q&A at the end, is really product leaders. And I'm going to try to differentiate carefully between individual product managers who have their hands on the products and the leaders who often have moved up from those roles into executive director, CPO roles, and their real goal, which is to help the folks on their team succeed. So we'll be digging into that. So let's go to my title slide if I could. Perfect. And I put a ladder up here just because I want to remind myself and everybody else that the number one job of a product leader is to make sure that we're pulling up the next generation of leaders up onto those ladders behind us, because it's the great product managers who may in fact be running teams sooner or later. So let's dig in. I have just a brief introduction for myself here. So a little bit about me. I've been doing software product management since the 80s. So anybody who thinks this is a new thing, not so much. Led my first product team starting 91. You can see a lot of data here. What's really important here, probably the most interesting, is that I've done at this point 13 of what we call the smoke jumper jobs. That's where a company has either forgotten to have a head of product, or they've misplaced one, or they need some help getting it right. And I come in on a 1 or 2 or 3 quarter basis to actually run the whole product management organization, hire my replacement. So been doing this a long time. Some of you may know I threw the first product camp back in 2008 and have been blogging in the space since 2001. So it's not that I'm necessarily smarter than anybody else about this, but I've had a chance to see some pretty large data sets about how things work. And so as we break this out into what product managers do and what product leaders do, this is really built on a fair amount of experience on my end. Okay, so let's dive right in. And before we can really talk about what product leaders do, we have to be pretty clear about what product managers do. And I have just 2 relatively dense slides here, but we'll go through them just to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Product managers, and I'll be making some distinctions as we go between product managers and product owners, because I have some issues about title and role. But in any case, a product manager, what do? Right? We worry about delivery of software or products, but delivery's not enough. So at the very first, we must be building things and getting to market, things that have market acceptance, whole products that customers love and ideally pay us for. And because we need to get paid for them, the second bullet here, we need to be targeting market segments. So all good product managers are thinking about collections of customers, segments, markets, groups, sectors, whatever. We should never be building individual products for individual customers unless we're in the professional services business rather than the product business. So that takes us to technical features, which we expected, and acceptance. If nobody uses our product, nobody cares. And adoption. How do we get folks to move forward and renew? Clearly there, I've bolded the word inevitable. I've never been in a product job where the demands were fewer than the development team. In fact, traditionally, we see a 10x or a 30x demand above what we can ever possibly build. So if you feel frustrated that you're a product manager and you have to make choices among too many things, gosh, that's just the job. And then last thing here, it falls on us often to be the folks who motivate and align all the groups who don't work for us. One of the essential things about product management is we have pretty much all of the responsibility and none of the authority. So we have to rally the troops. We have to get folks in marketing and sales and development, and everybody else on board, moving forward, aligned, or our products fail. So that's the bullet version for people who like text slides. This is a chart I built perhaps 15 years ago for an engineering team of mine who didn't understand what product managers do. So we're going to flip through this really quickly. You can see our 3 different audiences, or our 3 different organizational fronts here. Starting on the left, I call these makers. That's everybody who actually works on the products we're trying to build. Developers, designers, test engineers, DevOps, documentation specialists, everybody who actually puts in hard work to build pieces of our product. And what's the input? What are we expecting to deliver or what do we ask for from the product management group to the maker group? Okay. Here's a long list of things. I always start with the words context and conversation. If you're starting with user stories that are out of context, you're not doing your job. So we want to make sure that our maker team, our development team, our engineering team really understands customers, really understands context, that we're kicking around different ways of solving problems. This is about getting everyone involved, not just giving them some work to do. Notice this is a two-sided arrow. A quick observation for everybody who's listening. It's likely that every single one of your developers believes they're smarter than you if you're a product manager. You're not sure? Just ask them. They'll tell you, right? So when we're doing sort of command and control and telling our developers what to do, we're wasting both their good intentions and their smarts. So what do we get back? What's the return value from our makers, our development teams? I'll call them product bits, because it's not the whole product. It's just the tech. It's just the software. And we'll see in a moment, that's not what the rest of the company's looking for. Okay, sales and marketing on the right side. Notice I've separated our employees who are in sales and marketing from our real customers and our markets. Those are the people who pay us money. So what does marketing and sales want from product, or what do we need to give them? I'll create something here called sellable stories. Notice they're not user stories. They're the things that salespeople can repeat to customers to get them excited. Segmentation, messaging, benefits, you can see it. By the way, you're in a world of hurt if you're letting your sales team decide what pricing is. Should belong with product, right? Demos. Notice that there's nothing on the right which is a one-for-one match for anything on the left. And that means that we as product managers are constantly translating between what we're building and why people are going to want it. Okay, what do we get back from sales and marketing, particularly sales? And I'm an enterprise guy, so I'm sensitive about this. But mostly what we get back from sales and marketing is complaints, feedback, missing features, right? We get a list of things that somehow we didn't complete. We feel bad about it. But most importantly, notice that sales and marketing doesn't actually represent the customer. They represent some filter on what the customers have told them instead of what's really true for the customer. So the most important arrow on this chart, which is this one, is the one that connects product managers directly with real users and customers. When I parachute into a company to take over the product team and get things working again, one of the very first questions I ask of everybody on my new product team is, how many conversations have you had with real live customers in the last 3 weeks that was not a sales call? And anybody who tells me none and isn't embarrassed probably gets a promotion in the next couple of weeks to some other department than product. Because if you're not talking to customers, then I worry that most of the things you're asking your makers to do may not be the right things. Okay, last bit here. Almost every company has executives. What do the executives want from us, or what do we need? We as product folks are always giving a third set of things, not like the first two. Revenue forecast, commitments, roadmap strategy, all of these translate into money, right? So a hint for product folks, if you're talking to your executives and you're not denominating things in money, you're not talking about currency, you don't have their attention, because that's really what they're looking for. And what do we get back from our executive team? Generally, we get permission to hire more staff. We get targets for revenue. We get budgets for things. Notice, again, product management in the middle here, nobody works for us. We have to move everybody along, and we end up having to be trilingual because we're speaking 3 different languages with customers, with executives, and developers and makers. Okay, so that's the product manager job. Hopefully, no shocking news there for anybody who's already a product person. So let's talk about product leaders. Okay, I don't really know what a product leader looks like, so I picked this particular woman because I think maybe she is a product leader. And let's list the things we're talking about. First of all, when I say product leader, what I mean is somebody who manages a team of product managers. They might be a director, they might be a group product manager, a VP, CPO, I don't know, titles vary. Sometimes we have designers in that group. What I'm specifically not thinking about here, so there's some titles, are VPs of engineering. If you have a group that has 85 engineers and 3 product managers, I'll call you an engineering lead or a CIO or a CTO or something. But for the rest of this discussion, we're going to be thinking about folks who are primarily managing teams of product managers. Okay, so what do they do? And then we'll break those down into a few piece parts, right? So here's my 4 responsibilities for a product leader. We'll just click them through, and then we'll take each one apart briefly. The first one, of course, is you have to build a product team if you're going to be a product leader. So that means figuring out how many people you need, how we're going to hire them, training them, mentoring them, getting them to be successful, right? A primary job, otherwise you end up doing all the product management yourself. Second thing we do is we have to make sure that there's a product strategy. Now, it's not necessary for the product leader to actually create the strategy. In fact, often we don't. But if we don't have a product strategy, things are going to get bad pretty fast. And behind that, we should probably have some processes that work and some tools. But without strategy, we're mostly wasting our time. Okay, third thing we do, we've got to build a tremendous amount of cross-functional collaboration and trust with all the other groups in the company, as well as outside groups. So if marketing hates sales, we're probably helping there. We have to work with support and customer success and finance, outside groups, partners, channels, right? Remember, we have all the responsibility, none of the authority. So as the product leader, I spend a tremendous amount of my time helping everybody else in the company figure out why they should support what we're doing and why they should help, because otherwise they won't. And then the last thing we have here, working with C-level execs, depending on where you are, you may call them different things. VPs, managing directors, CEOs, CIOs, CTOs, CROs, whatever, right? If you're the product leader, you spend a lot of your time trying to keep the rest of the executives in the company still on strategy, because we know that every 2 minutes there's an interrupt to every executive that causes them to have a new idea that blows up our strategy. And if we can't stick with something very long, we don't get anything done. Okay, so notice that none of these 4 are doing the product manager job that the folks who work for us do. It's really important as a product leader, I'm trying to delegate as much of the product work as I can so that I can do the leader work. And so the takeaway here, which we'll repeat several times, I believe that the core responsibility for a product leader is to figure out how to make the conditions in your company such that your product managers can succeed. When I see a team of 20 product managers who are all failing, I consider that a leadership issue, not an individual issue. Okay, so let's dig into these. We'll take these apart, and then we'll put them back together again in the next 20 minutes. Okay, so first of all, designing, building, nurturing a team. So there's a woman designing her team. I can tell because there's an org chart. And you as a product leader need to have some point of view, right? You need to have some idea of how many product managers your team has to have. Typically, we might be counting development teams and matching 1-to-1, or doing a sort of 1-to-8 or 1-to-10 ratio of makers to product managers, or some other scheme. But you as a leader are going to have to add folks to that team and have some method for convincing the other executives you need more help. What else are we going to do, right? You need an organizational structure, and we're not going to completely take that apart here. We're going to touch on it briefly because it's a very deep topic. But somehow your product managers have to be aligned with development teams and products and markets in a way that lets them get their jobs done. What else do we have? Right, you need a hiring strategy. And I spend a lot of my time here. I'm a really strong advocate for hiring experienced product managers who've been product managers before at your company or another, because when we hire in the newbies or the first timers, I know I have to allocate 1 or 2 hours every single week to sit with that person for the first year to grow them into a product manager. And even more dangerous, a lot of companies want to choose subject matter experts. So if I'm building 7-factor authentication, I may convince myself that nobody can understand that other than somebody with at least 2 advanced degrees in authentication. Those are probably the least likely people I want as product managers, because they tend to want to overrule the world and tell everybody what the right answers are instead of listening. Okay, so you got to build a team. Let's keep going here, right? Coaching and mentoring plan, right? So how do I think about this? The most important thing to do here is to remember how product managers add value versus, for instance, how developers add value. There's a lot of executive thought which is completely, I think, misguided, that says product managers are supposed to get engineers to work faster and be more productive. I don't buy it for a moment. What I do buy is that product managers are the folks who make sure that what we're building is actually useful. It actually is going to move the revenue needle or the customer happiness needle or get things done or improve infrastructure. So I'm going to define waste from a product management point of view as building the wrong thing, not being late, not being slow, not quality, but building the wrong thing. Okay, what else? And what I hear from my development teams is they're very frustrated by us changing strategies, interrupts, daily shifting of things. We have to protect our teams from the chaos that our company has, right? And so I'm going to declare, by the way, proxies, if you count it as a 7-letter word, but I'm going to call it a 4-letter word, because every time we get input from someone else in our company who's not the end user, the ultimate end user who pays us money, we're getting filtered, we're getting partial information, we may be getting wrong solutions and bad information. So we as product managers have to have an organization where we talk directly with the real people making decisions in the outside world, right? And so I'm always trying to avoid proxies, right? And then user stories here. So a lot of people get very fussy about user stories. I honestly don't care how we write them or what the grammar is. What's important about user stories is that they create a conversation between me and my development team about what has to get done. It's not a perfect spec. It's not complete. It's a way to get things going. And if you think user stories are your job, then I think you're missing the big picture. Okay, let's keep going. So I mentioned briefly product owners and product managers, and I'm going to apologize in advance to everyone who has a product owner title. But in my view, the Scrum definition of product owner is entirely insufficient to do any business value software out in the world here. And I'll tell you why. Because if you open up the Scrum book and do only what the Scrum book says a product owner is supposed to do, you'll see these things: write stories, accept stories, prioritize backlogs, and be available to your team at all times. Now, notice in my earlier chart, I made 15 references to having to talk directly with customers all the time. If you're available to the team all the time, I don't know how you get out and actually meet the world. Here's the things we're missing, right? In the Scrum narrow definition, stakeholders and proxies get to tell you what's important. And as I've said, that generally leads to bad results. And there's a lot of focus in the Scrum process, which I love, around delivery as opposed to discovery. There's this magical thought that somehow someone has told the product owners what we should build, right? Again, reject that entirely. I think it's a product person's job to validate, discover, interview, get out in the world and find out what's true, right? And there's a real tendency in Scrum to focus on productivity instead of value. We have a lot of fake metrics around value, but it's mostly around velocity. So it's not that these are bad things, but on my teams, product owner is half of what every single product manager on my team does. They spend half their time doing the product owner work, and they spend half their time working with sales, with marketing, with customers, with the world to make sure we're building things that are valuable from an outside point of view, right? So I don't care if you call yourself a product owner, product manager, it makes no difference to me. But if you're not talking to customers directly, then someone else needs to be doing that for you. And I'm not quite sure what you're all about. Okay, so let's keep going through the last few of these so we stay on time. Second thing, driving strategy, tools, outcomes. Again, I think the strategy comes first. If we don't have a strategy, very few things we build are going to be very useful. And I see a pattern over and over again where companies adopt KPIs or OKRs or any other metric here, and they spend a year arguing about whether to adopt, for instance, OKRs. But then they spend only 5 minutes choosing the OKRs, and they choose all the wrong ones. So as the product leader who's sitting in the big executive meeting, it's my job to make sure we're actually choosing goals that support the business, that support good customers, that support growth, that support the things we need to do instead of some random metrics, right? Once we've done that, as a leader, we worry about portfolio level strategy and some amount of tooling. I generally don't care what tools my product managers and teams use as long as they're happy. And if they want me to make a decision, I will, but mostly I try to delegate that down because I'm not the one using the tools. Okay, back to OKRs for a minute. If you haven't seen Josh Seiden's book, and there's a picture of it, he's really, really smart about outcomes. Are we doing things that are going to make customers happier, bring in revenue, improve utilization, get engagement up instead of output, which is, did I deliver on time? Honestly, delivering on time is not useful if there's not an outcome that comes from that. So I'd encourage everybody, it's about a half-hour read. It's a brilliant book. Okay, let's keep going. Cross-functional teams, we mentioned this one briefly, right? So everything we do has to be instantiated or created by other folks outside of product management. I don't think anybody does those trust falls anymore that you see a picture of, because most of your legal organizations have now outlawed that because people get hurt. But this is about trust. This is about relationships. This is about getting folks not in our department to want to help us. Anybody who's a fan of classic literature would know that Tom Sawyer gets everyone else to paint the fence for him by making it attractive, right? We've got to get folks to help paint the fence. So psychological safety, cross-functional groups, right? How do we get aligned on goals? And so product leaders spend a lot of time thinking about how the different departments are rewarded. Here's a quick note for you. Your sales team does what you pay them to do, not what you want them to do. So if they're being rewarded and comped and promoted for selling things you don't have, they're going to keep doing that. If they're rewarded for selling professional services or agreeing to do special features, and there's nobody stopping them and taking money out of their pockets, you should expect them to continue doing that, right? So we as product leaders, product managers, are students of human behavior, and we think really hard about how to get folks to help, how to get folks to collaborate. Okay. Here's more collaboration, but on the inside. So this is somebody on my team, and I don't know if she's a designer or a developer or a product manager, because it doesn't matter. But when we're working on solutions, we start by bringing the problems to our teams. We try to frame them up as problems, because remember, everybody on your team is smarter than you are, or at least they think they are. And bringing their whole brains to the problem is really important here. So how do we get the smart folks in the room to work on solutions together rather than just writing some user story with my best guess? And I'm always frustrated when product managers tell me they gather requirements as if they're fruits on trees in the orchard, and I go out with my basket and I pluck requirements off the trees, perfect and ready to eat. Never happens, never happens, never happens. We and our team have to figure out what the problem is, and then we have to figure out how to solve it. Okay, rolling forward, working with other C-level execs, and the only reason I have a dog here is because everything I know about working with execs I learned from housebreaking some dogs, right? They have very short memories. They're working on their own things. We don't have their attention. Treats are important, right? So what do we do with execs, right? We as product leaders have to figure out how to push for coherent business strategies, right? There's always a shiny object. How do we stay on strategy long enough to finish anything, right? Good. What else do we have to do? Focus on end customer value. There's always somebody who wants us to goose up revenue this month by doing something horrible to customers, or changing the priorities for tech support so they don't help customers anymore. We are the champions for the end customers in the executive suite. We're the people who say no when somebody has a really good idea that's going to lose us joy or customers or revenue. So how do we fight for end users? There's a Tron quote in here, but I won't go for it, right? And then often as a product leader, I find myself having to coach the other execs. So I know that if marketing hates sales and sales hates marketing, product's going to fail. So how do I coach the rest of my team so that we're doing things that move the company forward, right? Okay, a couple more things, and I'm going to skate through these because they're very evident on my site for folks who want them. part of one of the ways I help the rest of the executive team and most product leaders can approach this problem is every single exec wants 150% of engineering to work on their part of the problem. Of course they do, because support only sees the tickets coming in, and new sales only sees the new deals, and engineering only sees the architectural problems, right? So there's some pie chart, there's some allocation, there's some strategy here before we get into tickets, where I find champions around the executive table who are going to help me fill in the different parts of my pie chart, right? So for instance, in an enterprise software company, I expect perhaps half of all of my story points or engineer weeks or strawberries or whatever we're counting to go toward visible features that customers actually see, right? If it were 100%, we'd be out of business. And I expect something like 30 or 40%, the red slice, to be all the infrastructure that we have to keep running and tech debting and scalable and secure and all these things so we don't lose our customers. If we don't do those two things, we're out of business. If we let the marketing side steal this whole pie, then we're also out of business, right? The bottom, I have a little slice for validation and R&D. Again, not just product managers. And because this might be an enterprise company at the top, and we all know this, every enterprise company has some specials every quarter where it's just one little tiny thing. By the way, if you ask the sales team, it's really, really easy. We could fit it into this week's sprint. It's probably only 10 lines of code, right? They all tell me this, right? But if we see the specials and the unplans and the deal-driven take more than about 10% of the pie, I worry about the health of the company. So again, as a product leader, I'm thinking about the organizational problem of how do we make sure we're building the right things, right? I'm going to skip this one because it's really just not so important and get right to the takeaways. In case anybody missed it, that's a takeaway container there. Okay, so leadership takeaways, right? Product leaders focus on their product teams and their product portfolios because they've done a good job of hiring great product managers and delegating all of the individual product work that they can possibly delegate down to their teams, right? So they're not doing individual work, they're supervising and coordinating, right? Other takeaways. You have to design your organization. Right? Nobody else is going to do it. HR is going to have some ideas. They're mostly not useful. And you're going to have to coach yourself for how to delegate and your team for how to take good work from you, right? So your job is to hire in a team. If they're not great, train them up to be great, and then pass the product work down to them so you can do the director work, right? You have to think a lot about how the other groups in your company are rewarded, how they think, how to get them to do the things we need to do. We as product leaders are champions for customer value. Notice I didn't say revenue, right? Every company wants more revenue. But as product folks, we care about loving our customers, making them more loyal, selling more units because they're great products, engaging the company. And then, as I said, here's the takeaway for all of this, which is as product leaders, we need to create the conditions such that our product managers can succeed, whatever that is. Okay, so here's my contact slide for anybody who needs it. I'm easy to find. My last name's the same as my handle. And then let's drop the slide share for a moment, and then I'll get just 10 seconds to close out. Perfect. And again, just to reiterate, I don't know if everybody wants to be a product leader. It's kind of a natural thing to happen after you've been in the product management section for a while. I don't tell anybody it's a better job than any other, but we bring our best game. We leave our ego at the door. We think about mentoring folks and coaching people and getting the organization healthy. There aren't a lot of direct rewards for being the head of product other than having a team that builds great products. And so for me, that's the takeaway is, are we building great things that customers love and pay us for? If so, then we're probably doing good product leadership work. Okay, I'm going to take a breath here and let everybody know that we've got a hard copy of the PDFs that I think are going to be shared out somehow here. And we're also going to move to a lounge for 15 minutes of Q&A. So I think there's a break coming up, and we're going to go to those lounges if you want.